How are you? How's it going? Let's start with information about what's happening around the world. This image has emerged showing what appears to be an attack with multiple missiles splitting in the air. An Iranian lawmaker claims or states that the Islamic Republic has missiles that can split into 80 separate warheads in mid-flight. The calculation he offers is, fire 10 at once and you'll have 800 bombs instantly. He also claimed that 16 TJIG missiles fired simultaneously would have the destructive effect of a tactical nuclear bomb. He also warned about a missile called Raskasis that has been used sparingly and would come into play at the right moment. Let's go into the details of what is known. What are the secret weapons? What is known? What is Iran's most dangerous card? Is closing the Strait of Hormuz their most dangerous option? Mobilizing aligned groups in proxy wars? Massive cyber attacks on a global scale? An escalation even nuclear? What are we discussing? Let's go live. Thank you. The coffee's refilled. We're ready. And let's go into the details of what are believed to be or could be the most important weapons, the strongest cards of the Iranians. The most obvious and most powerful card so far is the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't need to be closed 100%. It's enough to make it unsafe, to lay mines, use drones. It doesn't need a wall. It doesn't need any of that. We've already seen that the fear it has generated is enough to make people say, well, any attack that happens could sink a ship. So the ships don't have insurance, and without insurance, there's no guarantee of safe passage. So they don't go through. We don't know. It doesn't take much effort, and you put economic pressure on a global level. Yes, rising prices, rising cost of living for everyone. It's a global punishment, even for their own allies like China. Other close partners like India, which can also be close on some issues. They buy oil to begin with, Pakistan, etc. The second most important card would be their ties to the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. The regional cells they have in different countries, even in Latin America, Venezuela, Nicaragua, the southern United States, and South America. That is, what is the border between Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina? There could be people right here in Mexico, even in the United States itself. There could be people from the Revolutionary Guard. The Houthis, Hezbollah, and other radical groups that could be influencing other regions of the world, like the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Imagine if they shut down the Suez Canal. That's another obvious one too, but this one, the supposed secret weapons, could be one of the important cards. At least psychologically, they could give the impression that there's more strength than there actually is. The card is not to win militarily against the United States. That's not the idea, because they know they can't do it, but rather to act. For the United States to spend excessively billions of dollars on intercepting drones. Each drone that Iran sends costs them between $20,000 and $40,000. That's what it costs Iran, but for the United States it costs between $2 and $9 million to stop them. $20,000 while the other side spends $2 to $9 million. That's how it works. They wear each other down and raise economic costs. Each time it gets harder. It's part of the war of attrition. This is called a new cost curve in warfare with cheap drones, cyber tools, or open satellite information that allows weaker actors to put greater powers at risk. For example, you give them important information about the situation in the other strait toward the Red Sea. You use them, and I'm giving you information which already happened. They receive satellite information from Russia, and there is suspicion about China from the Houthis and the Iranians themselves. And with that, they knew when a ship was going to pass by, so then the Houthis could take action. Attacks on energy infrastructure in the Gulf, which we are already seeing. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain are vulnerable, and what's more, very vulnerable. Why do you think that is? Why do you think these countries are not getting involved in the conflict? Because getting involved in the conflict would mean accepting that they could lose all their refineries, not just one, but all of them. It wouldn't be very difficult for Iran to infiltrate these countries, given its very close ties and possibly already has many close associates linked to Shiite militias. and they completely destroy all your infrastructure. That's why they don't make a single move. It became clear there's a major weakness, which is also a strong card. It's not just the strait, but the fact that all the countries that have prospered a lot suddenly stop doing so. The other card is him. Let's say nationalism, which could be exacerbated right now in Iraq and in other surrounding regions. The movements of the wars. Let's say they would be less invisible, especially towards the Strait of Hormuz, but mainly thinking towards Europe. One of the strongest cards would most likely be some kind of attack on cyberspace. Acts of sabotage, for example. Infiltrations that could happen in other countries. We have to remember how many Iranians live in Germany. You say there's no problem? They are not Iranians who follow the Ayatollahs, but there are clearly groups. And we've seen it in the images in the protests where you can see there are pro-Iranian groups. Pro-Iran supporters of the Ayatollah regime living in Germany. They're already there, right? So it's just a matter of them following whatever orders they might get from Europe. This has also been thought about a lot because obviously they see a very high risk. It wouldn't have cost them anything. It wouldn't have cost them anything to go to the strait and say, let's see, put ships there and everything and say, no one's going to pass through here, right? And the beautiful strait would be open. It wouldn't have cost them much. And they don't do it because they know there's an internal risk, because they know there are groups that could jeopardize the security of that country. You can see it in this image. There's no music there, but it's certain that they're reporting. This is another one of the secret weapons, so to speak, that aren't so secret anymore because reports about the weapons they could be using are being published. This is shown by the outlet Iran International, in which, the sources that this independent Iranian outlet has say that, in fact, they've had them for some time now. They are preparing this type of weapon, and this is revealed by an Iranian legislator who, has given details about these supposed weapons. I insist it could be partly true, partly not. That's good, time will tell, but the weapons they've had up until now, especially the cheap drones, are the ones that have had the most impact. In the area of operations of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and all these places where they haven't been able to stop them. On the other hand, look at what's happening in another part of the world. Look at this. What they call total paranoia has been taking hold inside Russia in recent days. It has been reviewed by different analysts at think tanks like Russia or the Carnage Foundation and other organizations that have been observing Russia's behavior since the war began. They haven't analyzed them deeply from a psychological, military, internal, political, and other perspectives. Since the clan of Sergei Shoigu fell from grace, remember that, okay? That is the clan of Sergei Shoigu, a very close friend of Vladimir Putin, former Minister of Defense, who suddenly something happened and they told him, "We're not punishing or eliminating you or taking sides, but you'll get a lower position." He went from Secretary of Defense to a lower role. They gave him a position anyway. If T-Bone calls and they send him to North Korea, that's how things go, right? But it draws attention. According to these think tanks that have investigated Putin and his behavior, not just since the war in Ukraine, but since 2004. We have to remember that they constantly dismantle the Ministry of Defense. It's a strategy Putin uses out of complete distrust. Just from 2024 right now, 11 deputy ministers have been removed. Just from 2024 right now. There were 11 deputy ministers, but now only 4 remain. That's simpler to say, right? Only 4 remain in the position, and that's because some have been arrested, some have lost their lives, others have faced corruption charges and have been imprisoned. I mean, it's been a purge that started mainly in 2024, although there have been several since 2004. This has been the most important. Intelligence reports from channels like BCHK, specialized in leaks from the FSB, and technical confirmations from independent media like Medusa or Ormarsat, they say that the number from this purge has been surprising. This is not a reaction due to security issues. This is already complete paranoia. They say, within this situation of behavior and structural distrust, they say that this is not an anti-corruption fight. Obviously, corruption is there and they allow it. Rather, this goes beyond that. It seems like a preventive purge. They say, Sergei Segul may have lost formal power, but he still has a network of military officers. It has reached him. That is, Sergei Segul still has a network of military officers who could be planning a regime change. Right now as well, he maintains an intelligence network, and Sergei Segul is also said to be close to those who manage it, and he still has access to regional elites. That is, Sergei Segul presents himself as an important and even dangerous figure for Vladimir Putin himself. The recent internet outage, and by the way, the phone service outage that will take place from now on. From now until May 9, there will also be a phone service outage in Moscow. So it's not just the internet, now it's the phone service too. Ukraine is showing that it now has an increasing ability to enter Russia, and the military doesn't like this. They see it as a strategic mistake. It should never have been allowed. To show that weakness, now everyone knows that Russia has no defense system. That a country, well, with a badly damaged economy, which is Ukraine, with a one that has had alliances that came very late, where they give them weapons little by little, where in 3 days with Iran, in 3 days, the United States used more weapons than all the weapons it has given to the Ukrainians in 4 years, in 3 days. That's why many say they're giving them lots of weapons. Well, that's not the case. They knew how to manage them, form alliances, and make their own weapons. Otherwise, it would have been impossible. The help has been quite limited. Yeah, there is something happening in Russia. They say this could already be happening alongside a coup. Communication is being constantly cut off. The deputy ministers are practically all a new batch, new people. And the new one, May 9th, is the moment of maximum vulnerability. Why? Because that's the day of maximum vulnerability. That's where the military elite gather. Internal security is at its highest. Intelligence is at its peak. That's where political leadership can be on the line that day. So that's why they cut everything off. They cut communications, they cut the internet, they adjust everything they can so they won't be replaced, so there won't be any unexpected turn. Vladimir Putin would be more isolated than ever. There are reports of minimal public exposure, with movements being extremely restricted. Extreme protocols, security movements. Paranoia has increased, trust has decreased, and mistakes have also increased. We must remember that's how Stalin fell. That's how others fell too, right? Even Gaddafi started to show weaknesses in his regime. Saddam himself also began to have weaknesses in his regime. He began entering an extremely intense phase of paranoia. The problem isn't just losing, but giving up is also the problem. I mean, internally, it's not just that. It's that the people closest to you are the ones pushing you to leave. At first, Russian analysts, who had obviously already had to come out as critics of Putin's regime, they used to say that in Russia, a president can't fall unless the military removes him from within. And it seems that this is Vladimir Putin's biggest fear right now. I mean, it seems like that's where all of this is heading, right? Yevgeny Prigozhin's rebellion, right? Yevgeny Prigozhin, as the leader of the Wagner group, was this close to putting the regime in check. Prigozhin's armed column advanced all the way to Moscow. For hours they cleared the way for him. I mean, the military themselves cleared the way because there were checkpoints. He arrived, they cleared the way for him. There was almost no resistance because if there were a few shots, it was mostly with a helicopter that tried to fire at Prigozhin, but they fired back at it and then it left. But analysts say that from that point on, That was the breaking point for Vladimir Putin. From then on, he realized he could be overthrown and entered a phase of complete paranoia. Since Prigozhin fell, after that, the situation grew increasingly complicated. There are fears of a drone attack, fears of poison, some kind of poison, fears of infiltration. The Siloviki, which is the FSB, the army, and the National Guard, would truly be the state. And if this state decides to replace Putin, there's nothing that could stop them. It's not just a political issue, it's also a matter of broader deterioration. In Russia's isolation from the world, where Russia is no longer seen as the power it once was. And it's the same Russia, there's not much difference except now it's been exposed. It's become very clear what position it holds. Let's move on to other interesting points as well. Well, this image shows Vladimir Putin's forces have just launched a series of attacks towards Zaporizhzhia, causing fires. These are the rescue teams who appear to already be operating in the area. This is obviously inside Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. The military administration of the Zaporizhzhia region reportedly showed these images, these fires. And Zelensky was very upset, obviously, because of Russia. He said, look, let's calm down, let's have a ceasefire before May 9th, and then they attack. And in one of the attacks, 22 civilians die, which is not very common for Ukraine. 22 civilians. So they're very angry in Ukraine because they feel like they let their guard down, like, well, there's an attempt to calm things down by Russia because there's going to be a parade, and suddenly Russia attacks and hits 22 civilians. So obviously this is really upsetting them. They discuss saying it hasn't started yet, but now it's really going to start, and then they strike, right? So, well, this obviously upset them a lot, and honestly, I don't think there's going to be a ceasefire. If you ask me, I honestly don't think there's going to be a ceasefire. It's that simple. This one also, well, something is shown in the Sea of Galendis, right? In the waters in this area, they had reportedly been seeing fire coming out of the water, right? From the sea, right? They say. This is in Russia, right? I wonder if a submarine is passing by since something's happening in the area. There are several images showing smoke coming out from the sea. Let's see exactly where this is, right? And let's analyze and comment a little bit. Let's see, this is over there toward the Krasnodar region in Russia. It's at this point, look. Let me try to put it on the screen. There it is. Here is Ukraine, here is Crimea. From here, Russia begins, and those are the ports in Krasnodar. Here it would be somewhere around here with smoke coming out from under the sea. I think it could be a submarine, right? We have to remember that the Russian fleet in the Black Sea fleet, which was in this area that was invaded in Crimea, operated here. When Ukraine pulls out, Ukraine is quickly left without its fleet. I mean, Russia destroys its fleet at the beginning. That was right at the start. Ukraine decided not to build a new fleet, but instead to make drones, and these Ukrainian drones began sinking the Russian fleet. So they move their entire fleet, they move it over here towards Russia. They have to leave. So here there's no fleet here, and actually, well, this area is controlled by the Ukrainians through what? Well, through the same underwater or marine drones. So it wouldn't be unusual to think, since they've already sunk several submarines, that they might have sunk another one, right? But well, we'll see if that's confirmed, won't we? Meanwhile, it's another image that draws attention. Today, here's another image. Look, listen to this.
I wake up in the morning and there's nothing on my phone. Not a single text message, not a single message anywhere. That means Moscow is cut off.
Right now, she says it's a widespread outage. Well, this Russian lady says it's a widespread outage. The internet is down, the airports are completely closed, and all payments are failing. The phone lines are also failing. They said that in the next few hours, calls will be cancelled. More than 100 flights. They are currently delayed or rescheduled in Moscow due to an aerial threat. Almost all airports in Moscow have been closed. Residents report that card payments simply don't work anywhere. Mobile service is intermittent. Cell phones only work from time to time. Taxis and ATMs are simply not operating. Something is happening in Moscow. And well, obviously that's also quite serious. Obviously, and here's another image. This is at gas stations in Russia. That's it.
The gas station attendant says nothing works with a card.
They want to make payments there, but it doesn't work. Well, they're explaining that it doesn't work. The young lady is doing the usual and they can't charge. I mean, they want to charge for the gas. They can't charge. This is also an important part of what's happening in that region of the world. And well, OSINT intelligence researchers have also created this visualization of attacks. This is the same OSINT showing the movement. Let's see. Let's see if I can do it here. There it is. This is the one that shows the map. What they do is a digital forensic investigation in which they show where the attack is. They don't stop at Google Maps. They don't show it. There we see it. OSINT researchers made this visualization of last night's Nibir plant attacks. This is in Chevoroskary, in Russia. The Flamingo missile had struck the plant's main workshop during the night. In the early morning, long-range drones. They began attacking the plant after the Russian attacks. Immediately, a Ukrainian response targeting this area with Flamingo missiles. That must be it. That must be Russian soldiers' biggest annoyance now. You say you had a country that didn't have the ability to create its own missiles at this level? And now Ukraine makes its own missiles. It launches attacks on Moscow whenever it wants. And it no longer depends on missiles from Europe nor on missiles from the United States. So you're in a more exposed position with a neighboring country that has more capability. And now, well, obviously there's a lot of internal hatred. Because they haven't even returned the children they took, the thousands of children they haven't brought back. I mean, the anger of a population that, well, a part of it wasn't exactly pro-Russian, but they didn't get along that badly. We should remember that even Zelensky himself, well, he's from the pro-Russian area. I mean, from the area where they speak Russian, not necessarily pro-Russian. But now that area is extremely divided, is very angry because there's a shock after all the treatment they've received and what they've been put through. So it's a bad situation. Very poorly handled. Very poorly handled. Because in just a few years, the situation deteriorated and it also got worse for the Russians. That's right. And meanwhile, the other guy is in the palace, in his bunker, comfortable, without any trouble. Let's address other important matters too.
I'm speaking with the Iranian president soon at his request, so I won't share what I'll say as I'll keep it private. France has maintained a consistent position from the start. We call for an end to all hostilities, a return to diplomatic negotiations and respect for all the countries in the region. In this regard, last night I condemned the attacks that have affected the United Arab Emirates. And to restore freedom of navigation, and therefore, for me, the only possible option is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the free movement of all container ships, oil tankers, etc., and the absence of any toll or any restrictive measure. In that sense, I believe that any escalation, any unilateral attack against oil tankers, container ships, or against third countries is a mistake that fuels the conflict. It's a mistake that fuels the war, and it leads to escalation. These are the messages I will convey and the position France still defends.
Well, this comment from Macron, right? I mean, talking about the war, talking about how he's going to speak with the president, with Pesiskian, who would be part of the moderate wing, so to speak. Although we know he doesn't really have much power, but obviously the power comes through the relationships he can have with the politicians themselves. Or Pesiskian himself can pitch it, so to speak, to the Revolutionary Guard. That is, they need me because with me there's dialogue with Europe and with the world, right? I mean, it could be, right? But there are other messages as well from Macron himself and messages that are still pending here for us to discuss. Check out what Macron himself says, but this time about the Armenia issue, right? Let's listen.
I can tell you that the meeting of
The European political community, which was held today with more than 40 leaders, would never have taken place with Armenian leaders in the hands of the Russians or ambiguous about Russia. He pauses for applause. And so, Armenia has effectively made a decision, in a way. That of the geopolitical majority, to break free from this restriction and turn towards Europe. We can't act as if this doesn't exist. We, the French, must accept this choice and commit to it. The 2020 war over Nagorno-Karabakh with Azerbaijan was terrible for so many families, maybe for several of you, certainly for several of you. I mentioned earlier a terrible wound, but in 2020 we mobilized for humanitarian aid and then to provide military assistance. But let's look at this clearly. Who stood by Armenia? France, as much as possible. But Russia wasn't there, I assure you, no more than it is for Venezuela when it has problems, or for Syria alongside its historical allies. We saw it again with Iran when it has ties, or with the Malian regime when it's shaken by terrorists. It's better, as you can clearly see from the geopolitical context, not to depend too much on Russia.
Well, that's part of the message that Macron gives, obviously, and it's quite something, isn't it, that topic? Let's move on to the next topic. Let's go to the comments. How has it been going, Leonardo? How are you, Bayo, Francisco, Arte, Odelia, the whole community? Thank you so much for being here with us. There's a poll in the community section. The question there is obviously about what's happening with Russia. The big question is, what cards does Iran really have, right? I mean, and not only what cards they have, but also, well, not just the answer to what's there, right? But also, well, about the answers you think might be happening, right? The poll is starting now. Let's see if we can see it here. There it is. We just put it up. There are already some answers. The first point, the one that worries people the most, the harshest card, would be a nuclear escalation, right? The second point that is most concerning right now is the Strait of Hormuz. The third is activating allied groups. And lastly, the issue of cyber attacks, which is, let's say, the weakest one according to the community here, right? Well, thank you very much to those who are already participating. There. Well, we'll keep an eye on the comments. And also, down below you can leave in the comments other cards that Iran might have, right? We will be paying attention to that and we will be commenting on it. We'll be back in a little while. We'll be popping up there in clips with Jerez. We will be talking about what's happening in Mexico and what's happening in the world. Thank you very much. How have you been? Diablo, 0850. Hello? Leonardo says that if we take into account that Iran has a shadow government, I imagine Russia must do the same. If Vladimir Putin stays, someone will still replace us, right? It's very likely, isn't it? They probably already have a clear successor, right? That could be. Who might it be? Well, we'll have to wait and see. Best wishes to you, Leonardo, down in Argentina. And we'll see you again in a little while. Greetings to the community in California, to those watching us in Chicago, and to those watching us in Utah. Best wishes to those watching in Florida as well. Best wishes to everyone. Hope you're all doing well. We'll keep talking, right? We'll keep chatting. Have an excellent day. See you later. Take care.